It was a warm evening in a small town where everyone knew each other. The sun was slowly going down, and the street was filled with the sound of children playing, shopkeepers closing their stores, and people returning home. On this street walked a young white girl named Emily. She was carrying her school bag and humming softly, thinking about the homework she still had to finish before dinner. She was just an ordinary teenager, someone who had never caused trouble and had always been respectful to others. As Emily walked, a police car stopped near her. The sound of the siren had not been used, but the flashing lights caught her attention. She froze for a second, unsure of what was happening. A police officer stepped out of the car. He was tall, broad, and wore a serious look on his face. People nearby slowed down their steps to watch, curious about why the officer had stopped a young schoolgirl. The officer called out to Emily. His tone was sharp, commanding, and left no room for questions. Emily, confused and nervous, walked toward him. She clutched her school bag tightly, her heart beating fast. She had never been in trouble before, and now all eyes seemed to be on her. "What did I do?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. The officer didn't answer right away. He just stared at her, then looked at her school bag. He told her he needed to check her, claiming it was a part of his duty. Emily's hands shook as she tried to explain that she was just coming back from school. She showed her books, hoping that would be enough. But the officer wasn't listening. His eyes carried a sense of superiority, as if he believed he had complete control over the situation. He began questioning her in a loud voice, making her repeat herself again and again. The people standing nearby started whispering, some pulling out their phones to record what was happening. Emily's face turned red with embarrassment. She felt small and powerless. She looked around, silently begging for someone to help her, but most people in the crowd stayed quiet. They were afraid. They knew standing against an officer could bring them trouble. And so they just watched. Then, the officer did something that crossed every line of dignity and respect. In front of everyone, without any valid reason, he disrespected Emily by treating her in a way no child should ever be treated. He lifted her skirt, pretending it was part of a search. Emily gasped and froze, her eyes filling with tears. The crowd let out a shocked murmur, but no one dared to step forward. Emily's world crumbled in that moment. She felt exposed, humiliated, and deeply hurt. She could hear the sound of whispers, see the judgmental stares, and feel the shame rushing over her like a wave. She wished she could disappear. But among the silent crowd stood one woman who could not stay still. Her name was Denise. She was a black woman in her 40s, known in the community not just as a lawyer, but as someone who had always fought for justice, fairness, and dignity. She had worked on many cases where ordinary people were mistreated, and she knew the importance of speaking up when it mattered most. When Denise saw what had just happened to Emily, her chest tightened with anger, but she controlled her emotions. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, her heels clicking against the pavement. Her face was calm but firm, and her eyes carried fire. "Officer," she said loudly, her voice cutting through the silence of the crowd. Everyone turned toward her. The officer straightened his shoulders, surprised that someone dared to interrupt him. He looked at Denise with a smirk, as if he found it amusing that she thought she could challenge him. "Stay out of this, ma'am," he said. "I'm just doing my job." But Denise didn't back down. "Your job," she repeated, her voice steady. "Your job is to protect and serve, not to humiliate a child. What you just did is not only wrong, it is illegal." The crowd stirred again. Some people nodded quietly. A few moved closer, encouraged by Denise's boldness. Emily looked at Denise with wide eyes, her tears slowing as hope flickered inside her. For the first time since the nightmare began, she didn't feel completely alone. The officer's face darkened. He didn't like being challenged, especially not by a black woman in front of a crowd. He tried to dismiss her words, saying she didn't understand police procedures. But Denise held her ground. "I am a civil rights attorney," she declared, her voice rising so everyone could hear. "And I know the law very well. What you just did is a violation of this girl's rights. Every single person here saw it. And trust me, this will not be swept under the rug." Phones in the crowd were now pointed directly at the officer. People who had been silent were suddenly recording every second. They knew this moment was important. Emily wiped her tears and stood a little straighter, trying to find courage in Denise's presence. Denise placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and whispered softly, "You're safe now." Those simple words gave Emily more comfort than anything else could at that moment. The officer shifted uncomfortably, realizing that he had lost control of the situation. His confidence wavered as the whispers in the crowd grew louder. The power he once held over a frightened girl was slipping away. Denise's eyes never left his. "You think your badge gives you the right to abuse your power," she said firmly. "But that badge is not above the law. And you are going to learn that." Her words echoed in the air. The crowd, once silent, now had courage. Someone shouted, "That's right." Another said, "She's telling the truth." Emily looked at Denise with gratitude shining in her eyes. In her darkest moment, a stranger had stepped forward, fearless and strong, to stand up for her. And in that moment, she realized that justice wasn't just about laws or courts, it was about people like Denise, who refused to stay silent when others suffered. The officer glanced at the phones recording him, then back at Denise. His arrogance was gone, replaced by unease. He muttered something under his breath and stepped back. But Denise didn't let him off so easily. She turned to the crowd and said clearly, "Everyone, keep your videos. We'll need every piece of evidence." The people nodded. For the first time, the bystanders felt empowered. Emily, though still shaken, felt a spark of relief. She knew her life would not be the same after this night, but she also knew she had found an unexpected protector, someone who would make sure this injustice did not go unanswered. And so, on that small town street, as the sun finally disappeared and the street lights flickered on, the beginning of a powerful fight for justice was born. The street was no longer quiet. After Denise spoke up, people in the crowd felt something change in the air. What had been silence filled with fear turned into a low hum of courage. Emily, still trembling, held onto her bag tightly, her cheeks red from the humiliation she had just suffered. But Denise's presence beside her gave her strength. The officer, tall and broad in his uniform, puffed up his chest. He was used to people obeying him without question. He wasn't used to someone talking back, especially not in front of a crowd. He sneered at Denise, trying to intimidate her. "Lady, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm in charge here." Denise did not flinch. She looked him straight in the eyes. Her voice was calm, but it carried power. "You are not in charge of this girl's dignity. And you do not get to humiliate her under the excuse of doing your job." Emily's eyes filled with tears again, not from shame this time but from relief. Someone was finally defending her. She looked at Denise as if she were a shield, protecting her from the storm. The officer glanced around. He could see the phones pointing at him. Every move he made was being recorded. His jaw tightened. He barked at the crowd, "Stop recording. Put those phones away right now." No one listened. In fact, more people raised their phones higher. One man shouted, "We saw what you did. You can't hide it now." The officer's face turned red. He took a step closer to Denise, trying to tower over her. But Denise did not step back. She stood her ground, her hands steady by her side, her voice clear. "Intimidation won't work here. You crossed the line. And you know it." Emily clutched Denise's hand without even realizing it. The warmth of that hand gave her courage. She felt for the first time that she wasn't alone in this nightmare. The officer tried to change the subject. He pointed at Emily's school bag. She could be hiding something. I was just doing a proper search. Denise shook her head slowly, her eyes never leaving his. You searched her bag already. You saw her books. She's a child walking home from school. And what you did after that had nothing to do with the law. It was pure abuse of power. The crowd murmured in agreement. A woman in the back said loudly, that poor girl didn't deserve this. Another man added, we've seen this officer before. He always bullies people. The officer's confidence began to crack. He glanced nervously at the phones again. He could feel the situation slipping away from his control. He muttered under his breath, this is getting out of hand. Denise leaned slightly forward, her tone sharper now. It got out of hand the moment you humiliated her. But don't worry, officer, you won't be able to silence this. The law will have the final word. Emily finally found her voice. She looked up at the officer with trembling lips and said softly, I didn't do anything wrong. Why did you treat me like that? Her words hit the crowd like a wave. It was the innocent voice of a child asking a question that had no excuse. The officer didn't answer. He looked away, unable to face her. Denise bent down slightly to meet Emily's eyes. She spoke gently, her voice filled with kindness. You are brave, Emily. You did nothing wrong. Remember that. What happened to you says more about him than about you. Emily nodded slowly, tears rolling down her cheeks. But they were different tears now, tears of release, not humiliation. The officer stepped back, trying to regain authority. Fine, he said harshly. We'll settle this at the station. But Denise wasn't fooled. No, she said firmly. We're settling this right here, right now. In front of all these witnesses. You're not dragging this girl anywhere else. The crowd erupted in cheers and claps. People shouted, that's right. She's protecting her. We're with you. The officer realized he was outnumbered. The more he tried to insist, the worse it looked. He had never expected the community to rise up like this, and certainly not led by a black woman who knew the law better than he did. Denise turned to the people. Her voice carried authority, yet also compassion. Every one of you here has a responsibility. Don't let this moment fade away. Keep your videos safe. Speak up when the time comes. This is not just about Emily. It's about making sure this kind of abuse ends. Heads nodded all around. The crowd felt stronger together. They weren't just bystanders anymore, they were witnesses, ready to stand for justice. Emily squeezed Denise's hand tighter. Thank you, she whispered. It was all she could say, but those two words carried the weight of her gratitude. Denise smiled warmly at her. You don't need to thank me, sweetheart. Justice is your right. No one can take that from you. The officer finally backed away, muttering that he had other work to do. He returned to his car, his face pale with embarrassment. The flashing lights disappeared as he drove off quickly, leaving behind the crowd, the girl, and the woman who had stood up against him. As the car faded into the distance, the crowd broke into applause for Denise. Emily, though still shaken, felt a new sense of hope. She had been humiliated moments ago, but now she was surrounded by support. Denise placed a hand on her shoulder and spoke softly, "This is not the end, Emily. This is only the beginning. He will face justice, I promise you that." The street, once filled with fear, now carried a different kind of energy, the energy of courage, unity, and hope. People left that night knowing they had witnessed something important. They had seen what it looked like when one person stood up and changed everything. And Emily, walking home later with her parents by her side, kept thinking about Denise's words. She realized that justice wasn't just a word from a textbook. Justice was alive, breathing, and real, and it looked like the strong woman who had stepped forward when everyone else stayed silent. That night, Emily made a promise to herself: she would never forget the woman who stood up for her. And she would never forget the lesson she learned, that silence helps the wrongdoer, but courage helps the innocent. The days after the incident were not easy for Emily. She tried to go back to school and act as if everything was normal, but the memory of that evening stayed with her. Every time she walked past the place where it happened, her stomach tightened. She heard whispers from people in her neighborhood, some full of sympathy, some filled with curiosity. Emily hated the attention, but she couldn't escape it. Her parents, too, were struggling. They wanted to protect their daughter, but they felt powerless. The officer wore a badge, and in their small town, badges often carried more weight than ordinary voices. They feared nothing would come of it, that the system would cover it up. But Denise was not about to let that happen. She had promised Emily on the street that night that justice would be served, and she intended to keep her word. Denise had spent years as a civil rights attorney, fighting for people who didn't have the power to fight for themselves. This case was personal now. It wasn't just about law, it was about dignity, respect, and teaching the community that no one, not even a police officer, was above the law. Denise met with Emily and her parents at their home. She sat with them at the kitchen table, speaking in her calm but strong voice. "We will file an official complaint," she explained. "We have witnesses. We have video evidence. This officer thought he could use fear to silence you. But he underestimated the power of truth." Emily's father shifted nervously in his chair. "But what if nothing happens? What if they dismiss the case?" Denise leaned forward. "That's why I'm here. I've handled cases like this before. It won't be easy, but if we stand together and speak the truth, we have a strong chance. And remember, the videos are powerful. The world can see what really happened." Emily's mother reached across the table and squeezed Denise's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "We don't know what we'd do without you." Denise smiled softly. "You don't have to thank me. This is what justice looks like, standing up for those who are wronged." Over the next weeks, Denise worked tirelessly. She interviewed witnesses who had been on the street that night. Some were hesitant at first, afraid of retaliation, but Denise assured them that their voices mattered. Slowly, people began to speak. They told her how the officer had acted, how Emily had been humiliated, and how Denise had stepped forward. The videos became key evidence. They showed clearly what had happened. Denise gathered them, made copies, and prepared them for court. She knew the officer's defense would be to twist the story to say he was just doing his duty. But the videos told the truth without words. Emily, meanwhile, struggled with her own fears. The idea of standing in court terrified her. She didn't want to relive that moment in front of strangers. But Denise visited her often, guiding her gently. "You don't have to be perfect," Denise told her. "You just have to tell the truth. That's all anyone can ask of you." Finally, the day of the court hearing arrived. The courthouse was a tall, old building with heavy wooden doors and high ceilings. The air inside carried the weight of history. Emily walked in holding her mother's hand tightly, her knees trembling. Denise walked beside her, calm and composed, a steady presence in the storm. The officer was there too, dressed in a suit instead of his uniform. He tried to appear confident, but his eyes darted nervously around the courtroom. He had his own lawyer, who whispered hurriedly to him, preparing their defense. The judge entered, and everyone rose. The hearing began. The officer's lawyer went first, trying to paint a picture of a man who was simply following procedure. He argued that the officer had the right to search and that his actions were misunderstood. He spoke smoothly, but there was a sense of emptiness in his words. Then it was Denise's turn. She rose from her chair, walked confidently to the center of the courtroom, and began to speak. Her voice was steady, clear, and filled with passion. "Your Honor," she said, "this case is not about procedure. This case is about dignity. It is about an officer who abused his power to humiliate a child in public. It is about a young girl who did nothing wrong, yet was treated with disrespect and cruelty. And it is about a community that witnessed it all." She showed the videos. The courtroom grew silent as the footage played on the screen. Everyone could see the officer's actions. They could see Emily's fear, her humiliation, her tears. They could hear Denise's voice that night, standing up against injustice. The judge leaned forward, watching carefully. The jurors shifted in their seats, their expressions tightening with anger at what they saw. The truth was undeniable. Denise then called Emily to the stand. Emily's hands shook as she walked to the witness chair, but when she looked at Denise, she found courage. Denise gave her a reassuring nod. Emily spoke softly at first, but as she continued, her voice grew stronger. She described how she was walking home from school, how the officer stopped her, how she felt when everyone was watching, and how Denise had stepped forward to protect her. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she did not stop. She finished her testimony with one simple line: "I just want to be treated like a human being." The courtroom was silent. Those words carried more weight than any legal argument. The officer's lawyer tried to cross-examine Emily, asking questions meant to confuse her, but Denise objected firmly whenever the lawyer went too far. The judge sustained those objections. Denise made sure Emily wasn't bullied again, not even in the courtroom. Witnesses came next. Shopkeepers, passers-by, and others who had been on the street testified. They described what they saw, their voices clear and unwavering. Each testimony added another layer of truth, another piece of evidence against the officer. By the time Denise gave her closing statement, the courtroom was already convinced. She spoke from her heart, her voice filled with conviction. "We trust police officers to protect us. We give them authority because we believe they will use it responsibly. But when that authority is abused, it must be answered with justice." Emily's dignity was taken from her that night. Today, this court has the chance to give it back. Emily looked at Denise with admiration. To her, Denise wasn't just a lawyer, she was a hero. The judge announced that the verdict would be given soon. As the gavel struck, signaling the end of the session, Emily felt both exhausted and relieved. She had faced her fear. She had spoken the truth. And no matter what happened next, she knew she had done her part. Outside the courthouse, people gathered, waiting for the outcome. The crowd was larger now, filled with people who had heard about the case and wanted to show support. Emily stepped out with Denise and her parents, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a little lighter. Denise looked at her and said softly, "You were brave today, Emily. You spoke the truth. And that truth is stronger than any badge." Emily smiled through her tears. "I couldn't have done it without you." Denise placed a hand on her shoulder. "That's what justice is about. Standing together." As they walked away from the courthouse that day, Emily realized this fight was bigger than her. It was about every person who had ever been silenced, every person who had been made to feel powerless. And thanks to Denise, she now believed that justice could win. The day of the verdict finally arrived. The courthouse was filled with tension, every seat occupied by people who wanted to hear the outcome. Some were supporters of Emily and her family, others were curious townspeople, and a few were officers who had come to see what would happen to one of their own. The air was heavy, thick with anticipation. Everyone knew this case was more than just about one officer and one girl. It was about justice and whether truth could stand against power. Emily sat quietly between her parents in the courtroom. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept her chin up. She wore a simple dress, her hair neatly tied back. She wanted to appear strong, even though her heart raced in her chest. Denise sat beside her, calm and steady as always, holding a folder full of documents and notes. She had prepared for every possibility, but deep down, she believed justice was on their side. The officer sat across the room, his face pale. He had tried to appear confident in earlier hearings, but now he looked nervous. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, occasionally whispering to his lawyer. His arrogance from that night on the street was gone, replaced with fear of the consequences he might face. The judge entered, and everyone stood. The room grew silent as the judge took his seat. The sound of the gavel echoed, sharp and final. "Court is now in session," the judge said. The officer's lawyer made one last attempt to defend him, repeating the same argument that his actions had been misunderstood, that he was only following procedure. But it sounded weak now, almost desperate. The evidence was clear, the videos undeniable. The words no longer carried weight. Then Denise rose to speak one final time. She stood tall, her voice strong yet compassionate. She looked directly at the judge as she began. "Your Honor, this case is about trust. The people trust officers with authority because they expect that authority to be used for protection, not humiliation. When that trust is broken, it damages not only the victim but the entire community. Emily is just a child, an innocent girl walking home from school. She was treated unfairly, disrespected in a way no child should ever experience. And if we allow this to go unpunished, we send a message that abuse of power is acceptable. But it is not. The law does not bend for a badge. Justice must be equal for all." Her words rang through the room. The jurors shifted in their seats, listening intently. The judge's expression grew serious. Even the spectators leaned forward, hanging on every word. Denise continued, her tone softer now but filled with emotion. "Emily has shown courage beyond her years. She stood up and told the truth, even when it was hard. Today, Your Honor, you have the chance to show her and every child in this community that their dignity matters. That no one has the right to take it away." She paused, letting the silence settle. Then she returned to her seat, placing a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. Emily looked at her with admiration and whispered, "Thank you." Denise gave her a small smile, as if to say, "This is what justice looks like." The judge cleared his throat. The room fell completely silent. "I have considered all the evidence presented in this case," he began. "I have watched the videos, heard the testimonies, and weighed the arguments carefully. This court finds that the officer abused his power and acted in a manner unworthy of his position. His actions caused harm, humiliation, and fear to a child who did nothing wrong. Such behavior cannot and will not be tolerated." Gasps filled the courtroom. The officer lowered his head, his face red with shame. His lawyer's shoulders slumped. The judge continued, his voice firm. "Therefore, this court finds the officer guilty of misconduct and abuse of authority. He is hereby stripped of his badge and dismissed from the police force. Furthermore, he will face legal consequences as determined by the law for his actions that night." For a moment, the courtroom was silent, as if no one dared breathe. Then the sound of clapping began, soft at first, then louder, spreading across the room until the entire courtroom was filled with applause. People stood to their feet, cheering not in celebration of punishment, but in celebration of justice. Emily's mother burst into tears, hugging her daughter tightly. Emily's father wiped his eyes, trying to stay composed, but his relief showed in his trembling hands. Emily herself sat frozen for a second, her eyes wide. Then a smile slowly spread across her face. The weight she had been carrying for weeks seemed to lift off her shoulders. She looked at Denise with pure gratitude. Denise leaned down and whispered, "Justice has spoken, Emily. Today, you won back your dignity." The officer was led out of the courtroom quietly, his head bowed. There was no arrogance left in him, no power. He had been brought face to face with the consequences of his actions, and now he would have to live with them. Outside the courthouse, the crowd that had gathered erupted in cheers when they heard the verdict. People hugged each other, some holding up signs they had brought in support of Emily. Reporters rushed forward, cameras flashing, asking Denise and Emily's family for statements. Denise spoke firmly to the cameras. This victory is not just for Emily. It is for every person who has ever been mistreated by those in power. It is a reminder that justice belongs to everyone, no matter their age, race, or background. And it is proof that when we stand together, truth wins. Emily stood beside her, holding her mother's hand. Reporters asked her how she felt. She took a deep breath and answered simply, "I'm happy it's over. I just wanted to be treated like a person. And today, I feel like I am." The crowd applauded her words. People admired her courage. Later that evening, Emily sat in her room, staring out the window at the setting sun. She thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the shame, the trial, and finally, the verdict. She knew she would never forget it. But she also knew she had learned a lesson she would carry forever. Her father knocked softly and entered her room. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently. Emily smiled faintly. "Better. It feels like I can breathe again." He sat beside her. "I'm proud of you, Emily. You were so brave." She looked at him with thoughtful eyes. "I wasn't brave alone. Denise was there. She made me believe I could be strong." Her father nodded. "She's a remarkable woman. But remember, you had the strength inside you too. She just helped you find it." Emily thought about that. Maybe he was right. Maybe she had discovered a strength she never knew she had. And that gave her hope for the future. Meanwhile, Denise sat in her office that night, reflecting on the case. She had handled many trials in her career, but this one touched her deeply. She thought about Emily's face when the verdict was read, the relief in her eyes. That was why she did this work, not for recognition or applause, but to restore dignity to those who had lost it. She leaned back in her chair, whispering to herself, "Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about healing." And today, healing began. The community, too, felt the impact. Conversations started in homes, schools, and workplaces about accountability, fairness, and respect. People spoke about the importance of recording the truth, of standing up when someone was wronged. The case became a turning point, a story people would tell for years to come. And for Emily, it was more than just a legal victory. It was proof that even in her darkest moment, when she felt powerless and humiliated, there was still hope. She had learned that justice was real and that sometimes, it looked like a strong black woman who refused to be silent. The courthouse doors closed behind them, but the story was far from over. For many people, the verdict was only the beginning of something bigger. The case had shaken the small town, forcing everyone to look closely at the power of authority, the meaning of justice, and the courage it takes to stand up. And at the center of it all was Denise, the black woman who had spoken up when everyone else stayed silent. In the weeks after the trial, news spread far beyond the town. Local newspapers covered the story, then regional outlets, and soon it reached national attention. Headlines read, "Attorney stands up for young girl against abusive officer, justice served." Denise's phone rang constantly, people calling to thank her or to ask for her help with their own struggles. She knew she couldn't help everyone personally, but she also knew she couldn't ignore the growing demand for change. Emily's family tried to return to normal life. Her parents wanted her to focus on school again, to smile more, to laugh like she used to. At first, Emily struggled. The memory of that night still haunted her, and she sometimes woke up with tears after dreaming about it. But every time she felt weak, she remembered the courtroom, the judge's words, and the way Denise stood by her side. Slowly, she began to heal. Denise made sure to check on Emily often. She visited their home, sat with her during study sessions, and sometimes just talked about ordinary things: books, hobbies, the future. She wanted Emily to see that her life wasn't defined by that one night, but by the strength she showed afterward. One afternoon, Emily asked Denise, "Why did you do it? You didn't even know me." Denise smiled softly. "Because justice doesn't ask if we know each other. Justice asks if we care. And I couldn't stand by and watch a wrong happen without speaking up." Emily thought about those words for a long time. They settled deep in her heart, shaping how she saw the world. Meanwhile, the community was changing. People who had been afraid to speak against authority now felt braver. The case had given them a voice. Parents taught their children about dignity and respect. Teachers discussed fairness in classrooms. At community gatherings, people shared their own stories of being mistreated, stories they had once kept hidden out of fear. Denise encouraged them to write down their experiences and, if possible, to report them. Soon, Denise organized a local campaign for police accountability. She worked with community leaders, pastors, and teachers to create workshops where people could learn about their rights. She invited other lawyers, activists, and even retired judges to speak. The message was clear: power without responsibility is dangerous, and every citizen deserves protection under the law. Emily and her family attended the first event. At first, Emily was shy, sitting in the corner. But when Denise introduced her to the audience as the young girl who reminded us all of the importance of dignity, the room filled with applause. Emily blushed, but she smiled too. She realized she wasn't just a victim anymore, she was a symbol of courage for others. The officer, stripped of his badge, quietly left town. He had lost the respect of the community and the authority he once abused. People rarely spoke his name anymore. Instead, they spoke about what the trial had taught them. Denise, however, didn't let bitterness guide her. She often reminded people, justice is not about revenge. It's about accountability. When someone abuses power, they must face the consequences, but the goal is not to destroy, it's to rebuild trust. Her words softened even those who had been angry and wanted harsher punishment. Emily's parents were deeply grateful. They told Denise many times, "You gave our daughter back her confidence. We will never forget what you did." Denise always answered the same way: "She had the strength inside her all along. I just helped her show it." Months passed, and the town looked different. Police officers were more careful, more respectful. Community members attended public meetings, asking questions and demanding transparency. A committee was formed to review police conduct, something that had never existed before. Denise became an advisor to that committee, making sure the promises of change turned into real actions. Emily, too, found new purpose. She began speaking at school assemblies about courage, dignity, and justice. She told her classmates, "If you see something wrong, don't stay silent. Even if you're afraid, speak up. Because silence helps the wrong, but courage helps the innocent." Her words inspired other students. She had turned her pain into a lesson for others. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky orange and pink, Denise and Emily sat together on a park bench. Families played around them, children laughed, and the air was filled with the smell of fresh grass. Emily turned to Denise and said, "You know, you changed my life." Denise shook her head gently. "No, Emily. You changed your life. You stood in court, you told the truth, and you faced your fear. That's something even many adults struggle to do." Emily smiled. "Maybe. But I'll always remember that you stood up for me when no one else did." Denise looked at her with warmth in her eyes. "That's what we're meant to do for each other. That's how communities grow stronger." The case slowly faded from the news, but its impact never left the town. People often pointed to it as the moment everything began to change. And whenever someone asked who made it possible, they didn't just mention Denise, the attorney, or Emily, the girl. They spoke about both of them together, a woman who fought for justice and a child who found her voice. Years later, Emily would look back on that chapter of her life not just with pain, but with pride. She would remember the tears, the fear, and the humiliation, but she would also remember the courage, the support, and the victory. And above all, she would remember the lesson that justice is not a distant idea written in books, it is real, and it is made by people who choose to stand up when it matters most. As for Denise, she continued her work, helping more people, speaking at conferences, and inspiring young lawyers to use their voices for the powerless. But whenever she thought of her most meaningful cases, she always remembered Emily. She remembered the little girl with tears in her eyes who turned into a symbol of strength for an entire community. And in quiet moments, when Denise reflected on her journey, she smiled and whispered to herself, "This is what justice looks like."